The bathwater had gone tepid 20 minutes ago, but I stayed in it anyway, my knees breaking the surface like small islands, my hair piled high and held with a clip I'd had since college. The tub was deep, cast iron, and it held heat the way old things do, reluctantly, then all at once, then not at all. I'd been in it long enough to reach that third stage. The water was a gray, milky nothing now, and my fingers had pruned past the point of caring. I pulled the plug and listened to the drain swallow. The sound was familiar. Everything in this house made a sound I knew. The whine of the bathroom door when the humidity swelled the frame, the tick of the baseboard heater in the hall, the particular pitch the wind took when it came across the lake from the north. I'd been here 3 nights, and already my body had begun to map the place without asking my mind for permission. That was the point of coming, to let the house teach me its rhythms until my own grief quieted enough to let me work. The steam followed me into the bedroom, clinging to my shoulders and the backs of my thighs. I didn't bother with the overhead light. The lamp on the nightstand threw a warm circle across the quilt, and that was enough. I pulled on the robe I'd left draped over the footboard, flannel, old, a faded plaid that had belonged to my mother, and tied the sash with a slow, deliberate knot. Outside, the wind had picked up. It rattled the window panes in their casings, and I could hear the bare branches of the birch tree scraping against the south wall. The forecast had called for snow, but the forecasts up here were as reliable as a coin toss. I'd learned that as a kid, spending summers in this house with my mother, who always packed for both seasons regardless of what the radio said. I crossed to the dresser and let my fingers rest on the small framed photograph I'd set there the first night. My mother at 35, holding me at 4, both of us squinting into the sun on the dock. I didn't pick it up. I just touched the edge of the frame once, and then I moved toward the hall. The house was quiet in the way that old lake houses are quiet in winter. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a building settling into its own bones. The wood stove in the living room had burned down to embers, and I could smell the last of it, cedar and the faint, sweet ghost of the applewood I'd added before my bath. I was thinking about whether to build the fire back up or just go to bed when I heard the click. It was a small sound, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the house or the weather. It was the sound of a deadbolt turning. I stopped at the top of the stairs. My hand found the banister, and I held it, not gripping, just resting my palm there, waiting for the sound to resolve into something I could explain. The front door opened. I heard the push of it against the jamb, the brief suck of cold air into the lower floor, and then the door closed again. A pause. Then the muffled thud of boots being removed, 2 of them, one after the other, with the particular rhythm of a person who is trying to be quiet and not quite succeeding. A man's voice called up from the foyer. "Hello?" It wasn't a shout. It was the kind of hello you offer when you're not sure anyone is there to answer. Tentative, almost polite, as if the house itself might be sleeping. I didn't answer. I stood at the top of the stairs in my mother's robe, and I counted the things I knew to be true. I had locked the door. I was alone. The nearest neighbor was 200 yards away, and as far as I knew, the house was shuttered for the season. No one should have had a key. I took the stairs slowly. The old wood creaked under my feet, and I didn't try to hide it. If there was someone in my house, I wanted him to know I was coming. I wanted him to hear me before he saw me. He was standing in the foyer when I reached the bottom step, and he looked up at the same moment I looked down. He was tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and the kind of face that seemed to have been arranged around a habit of careful listening. His eyes were dark, and they widened when they found me, not with fear, but with the particular, gut-level shock of a person who has just realized he is in the wrong place. He was holding a wool cap in one hand, and his coat was still dusted with snow. His boots sat by the door, lined up neatly, as if he'd been raised by someone who taught him not to track wet shoes across another person's floor. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it immediately, Before I could speak, before I could demand an explanation or reach for the phone or do any of the things a woman alone in a house at night is supposed to do when a stranger lets himself through her door. I think I've made a mistake. You think? My voice came out steadier than I expected. I was still holding the banister. This is going to sound... He stopped, ran a hand over the back of his neck. I thought this was my uncle's house, Saul Abramson, 2 doors down. The keys are the same. They've always been the same. The old locks, the schlag deadbolts from the 60s. Half the houses on this road use the same key. It's a thing. It's been a thing for 40 years. I knew about the keys. My mother had told me years ago when she'd given me my own set. Don't lose these, she'd said. Asterisk half the lake can get into your house. She'd meant it as a joke. I'd never thought to test whether it was true. You're in the wrong house, I said. I'm in the wrong house. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, the shock had given way to something closer to mortification. I am so sorry. I drove up from Boston this afternoon. I haven't been here in, God, 6 years. I left the highway later than I meant to, and the snow was starting, and I saw the light in the window and I assumed. He stopped again. I shouldn't have assumed. No, I said, you shouldn't have. We stood there in the foyer, 2 strangers separated by 6 feet of worn pine flooring, and the wind outside chose that moment to make itself known. It came in a long, low howl that pressed against the walls and made the windows shudder in their frames. I glanced past him, through the small pane of glass set into the front door, and I could see the snow falling now. Not the gentle, drifting snow of a November evening, but something heavier, something driven sideways by a wind that had stopped playing. The flakes were coming down in sheets, and they were sticking. Eli followed my gaze. That's not good. No, I said again, it's not. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket and checked the screen. I watched his face as he did it, the small frown, the way his thumb moved across the glass, the slow, reluctant shake of his head. No service. There never is, up here, not in weather like this. He looked at the door, then at his boots, then back at me. I can go. I can put my boots back on and walk down to my uncle's place. It's only 2 doors. I've got the key. I looked out the window again. The access road was a narrow strip of gravel that wound through the trees for half a mile before it met the county route. I couldn't see it from the door, but I knew what it looked like in a storm. I knew how fast the snow filled in the ruts, how the drifts piled up against the culverts, how a car or a person could get stuck and stay stuck until someone with a plow decided to come looking. The wind was gusting now, and the snow was coming down hard enough that I could barely make out the shape of the birch tree 20 feet from the porch. You're not walking anywhere in this, I said. Not tonight. He didn't argue. He stood there with his cap in his hand and his phone in his pocket, and the snow melting into dark spots on the shoulders of his coat, and he didn't argue. That was the first thing I learned about Eli Cohen. He knew when a situation had turned, and he didn't waste energy pretending otherwise. I'll sleep on the couch, he said, if you'll let me. I won't. He paused, and I watched him choose his next words carefully. I won't be in your way. I thought about the couch. It was a good couch, old and deep, with cushions that had been broken in by decades of summer naps. I thought about the wood stove, which would need feeding through the night if the temperature kept dropping. I thought about my mother, who had always told me that the worst thing you could do in a storm was turn someone away, and who had never once locked her own door, not in 40 years of coming to this lake. The couch pulls out, I said. There are extra blankets in the hall closet. You can stay until the road clears. He nodded, once, a small, contained motion that seemed to carry more relief than he was willing to let his face show. Thank you. I didn't say you're welcome asterisk. I wasn't sure yet whether he was. I turned and walked back toward the stairs, and I heard him move into the living room behind me, his socked feet quiet on the old floor. The wind kept howling, the snow kept falling, and somewhere in the dark beyond the windows, The access road was disappearing under a white that would not stop for hours. I woke to the sound of the wind still working at the eaves, a low, insistent push that had not let up since I'd climbed the stairs the night before. For a long moment I lay still under the quilts, watching the ceiling brighten by degrees into a gray that had no sharpness to it, no sun behind it at all. The storm had settled into something steady and patient, the kind of weather that intended to stay. Then I remembered the man on my sofa. My hand went still on the edge of the blanket. I listened for movement from downstairs and heard nothing, no footsteps, no cough, just the house ticking around me the way old wood does when the cold finds it, and the deeper, steadier hum of the wind outside. I pulled on a sweater and a pair of wool socks and went down the stairs quieter than I needed to, as though I were the guest and not the other way around. He was still asleep. The sofa faced the cold hearth of the wood stove, and Eli Cohen lay on his side with one arm tucked under the pillow I'd given him, the quilt pulled high around his shoulders. His face in sleep was younger than I'd expected, the careful stillness of the night before loosened into something unguarded. I stood in the doorway for perhaps 3 seconds, and then I turned away before I could be caught looking. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator and took stock. The chili I'd made 2 days ago sat in a covered bowl, and there was enough cornmeal in the cupboard for a small batch of bread. I moved through the familiar motions of cooking with a kind of deliberate focus, measuring the cornmeal into a bowl, cracking the single egg I'd been saving, working the batter with a wooden spoon until my arm ached. The kitchen filled with the scent of butter melting in the cast iron pan, and I let myself fall into the rhythm of it, the way I used to when my mother stood at the same counter and I sat on the stool beside her, waiting for her to hand me a taste of whatever she was making. I heard him before I saw him, the creak of the sofa frame, the pad of socked feet crossing the living room floor. He stopped at the kitchen doorway and didn't come in. "That smells like something I shouldn't be standing outside of," he said. I glanced over my shoulder. His hair was rumpled and he'd put his glasses on, and he stood with his hands in the pockets of his jeans like a man who was making a point of not taking up space. "It's just cornbread," I said. "My grandfather's recipe. It's not complicated. Complicated isn't what makes things good." I didn't have an answer for that, so I turned back to the stove and slid the pan into the oven. The chili was already warming on the burner, and I stirred it once, twice, and then I pulled 2 bowls from the cabinet and set them on the counter. The act of setting out a second bowl felt like a decision I hadn't quite made yet, the kind you make with your hands before your mind has caught up. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I know." I ladled chili into both bowls and broke the cornbread into rough pieces on a plate. But there's not much else to do right now, is there? We ate sitting on the floor in front of the wood stove, the only place in the house that held any real warmth. Eli had gotten the fire going while I was in the kitchen, and he tended it with a practiced hand, adding a split log when the flames began to thin, adjusting the damper with a small, precise motion. I watched him do it and thought about my father, who had always fought with this stove as though it were a living thing that refused to cooperate. Eli moved around it like someone who'd been taught. "Your uncle teach you that?" I asked. He looked up from the fire, a piece of kindling still in his hand. "Yeah, Saul believed in doing things yourself, not out of some rugged individualism thing. He just thought if you understood how something worked, you'd take better care of it." He set the kindling on top of the log and watched it catch. "He used to bring me up here when I was a kid. Summers, mostly. My parents were busy. Saul was the one who had time. That's a good thing to have, someone who has time." It was. He leaned back against the sofa frame and took a bite of cornbread. "This is really good, by the way. What's in it?" "Not much. Cornmeal, egg, buttermilk if you have it. My grandfather used to say the secret was to not overthink it." Smart man. He was a farmer in South Georgia. He didn't have the luxury of overthinking anything. Eli smiled, a small, quick thing that changed his whole face and then disappeared. Saul would have liked him. He had a thing about people who just got on with it. I finished my chili and set the bowl aside. The wind pushed against the windows, and the house answered with its own small groans, but the fire kept its steady warmth between us. I thought about the bottle of bourbon in the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one I'd brought up from the city still wrapped in its brown paper bag, the one my mother had bought the year before she got sick and never opened. I'd been saving it for something I couldn't name. I stood up and went to the kitchen. When I came back, I was holding 2 small glasses and the bottle. Eli looked at the label and then at me. "You sure?" "It was my mother's," I said. "She never got around to opening it." I poured an inch into each glass and handed him one. The bourbon was the color of dark honey, and the smell of it rose up warm and sweet and a little sharp at the edges. I sat back down on the floor and held my glass in both hands. "To people who had time," I said. He touched his glass to mine. "To people who had time." We drank. The bourbon went down slow and warm, and I felt it settle somewhere behind my ribs, a small spreading heat that had nothing to do with the fire. Eli took another sip and then set his glass on the hearth, and for a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't the awkward kind from the night before. It was the kind that lets you sit inside it without having to fill it. "Saul used to sit right here," Eli said eventually, "right in this spot. He'd have a drink and watch the fire and not say a word for an hour. I used to think he was lonely. It took me a long time to figure out he wasn't." "What was he then?" "Present." He turned the glass in his fingers. "He was just present. That's a harder thing to be than most people think." I looked at the fire, at the way the flames moved over the wood, and I thought about my mother in her last months, how she'd sit by the window in our apartment and watch the street below for hours, and how I'd never asked her what she was looking at because I was afraid the answer would be something I couldn't fix. I took another sip of bourbon and let the thought sit where it was. After a while, I reached for my sketchbook, which I'd left on the end table the night before. The fisherman was there on the first page, just the rough shape of him, the broad shoulders and the heavy coat, and the cap pulled low over his eyes. I'd started him weeks ago, before I came up here, and I still hadn't figured out his face. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the fishermen in the village where she grew up, in Liguria, men who went out before dawn and came back with their nets and their silences, and I'd been trying to draw one of them since I was old enough to hold a pencil. But every time I got close, the face came out wrong, too hard, too distant, like a man who wouldn't come back. I picked up the charcoal and began to work on the line of his shoulder, the way the coat hung heavy on him. I didn't look at Eli. I didn't know if he was watching, and I didn't want to know, because if I knew I'd stop, and if I stopped I'd have to explain what the drawing was about, and I wasn't ready to do that. But I could feel him there, a quiet, steady presence at the edge of my vision, and I realized after a few minutes that I hadn't put the charcoal down, that I was still drawing, that his being there hadn't made me stop. I set the charcoal on the table and looked at what I'd done. The fisherman's shoulder was right now. The weight of the coat was right. The face was still a blank space I hadn't solved. "You're an illustrator," Eli said. It wasn't a question. "Children's books, mostly. That's a good thing to be." I closed the sketchbook and set it aside. Some days, he didn't push. He finished his bourbon and set the glass on the hearth, and then he stood up and carried the bowls to the kitchen. I heard the water run in the sink, the quiet clink of dishes being stacked, and I stayed where I was on the floor, my back against the sofa, my hands in my lap. Outside the snow kept falling, and inside the fire kept burning, and for the first time in 3 nights, the house didn't feel like a place I'd come to hide. It felt like a place where someone else was, and that was a different thing entirely. The hum cut out mid-breath. I didn't register it at first. The silence was too sudden, too complete, and my hand stayed suspended over the sketchbook in my lap while my brain tried to place what had changed. Then the darkness followed, a thick swallowing black that erased the corners of the room and left only the orange glow of the wood stove's glass door, a small square of firelight that suddenly seemed very far away. "Furnace," Eli said from somewhere across the room. Not a question. I heard him stand. The floorboards spoke under his weight, and then his footsteps moved toward the kitchen, toward the narrow closet where I kept the flashlights and the spare batteries and the box of emergency candles I'd never actually opened. I stayed where I was on the floor, my back against the sofa, the sketchbook pressed against my thighs, and listened to the storm outside for the first time since the power had died. Without the furnace's low drone beneath it, the wind sounded different, hungrier. It found the gaps in the window frames and sang through them in a thin, high note I hadn't noticed before. "Got it," his voice carried from the kitchen, steady and unhurried. "Two of them. Batteries are, let's see." A pause. "They're fine." A beam of light cut across the living room, wobbled, then steadied. Eli walked back toward me, the flashlight held low, and I watched the circle of light sweep over the floorboards, the edge of the rug, the toe of his left boot. He stopped a few feet from where I sat and angled the beam toward the ceiling so the light pooled between us instead of in my face. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded before I remembered he couldn't see me clearly. Yes. He didn't press. He turned toward the wood stove, and the flashlight beam swung with him, catching the stack of split logs beside the hearth and the cast iron handle of the stove door. He crouched down, and I watched him open the door, check the fire inside, and reach for another log with the same unhurried, deliberate motion he'd used all evening, as if the dark were just another variable to account for, as if he'd done this 100 times before, in 100 other rooms, and the only difference now was the company. "My uncle taught me to tend a stove like this," he said, and his voice was quieter now, closer to the fire. "Not this exact one, but one like it. Same make, same year. He said a good fire should never need you to fuss over it, just to pay attention." I set the sketchbook aside and pushed myself up from the floor. My legs were stiff from sitting too long, and I felt my way toward the stove with one hand on the back of the sofa, then the arm of the chair, then empty air. The firelight was brighter now that I was standing, and I could see Eli's profile in its glow, the line of his jaw, the way his beard caught the light, the careful, almost tender way he set the log inside the stove and nudged it into place with the poker. "Here," I said, and I reached for the second flashlight. "I'll hold the light while you do that." He glanced up at me, and the firelight moved across his face. "Thanks." I knelt beside him. The hearthstones were warm under my knees, and the heat from the open stove door pressed against my cheeks and the backs of my hands. Eli reached for another log, and I angled the flashlight beam so it fell across the woodpile, and then his hand and my hand were in the same small circle of light, and when he turned back toward the stove, his knuckles brushed the inside of my wrist. A half-second of contact, incidental and brief. I didn't pull away, neither did he. The logs settled into the fire with a soft crunch, and the flames found it, licking up along the dry bark. Eli closed the stove door and latched it, and the glass window glowed orange again, and we were still kneeling side by side on the hearth, the flashlight beam now aimed at the floor between us, and I could hear him breathing. I could hear myself breathing. The storm outside had gone quiet for a moment, as if the wind were drawing its own breath, and in the silence I became aware of the space between us, 6 inches, maybe less, the warmth of the stove on one side of my face, the warmth of his shoulder on the other. "It's going to get cold if the power stays out," I said. My voice came out lower than I'd intended. "The stove will hold it," he said. "These old ones, they're built to heat a whole room for hours. Saul used to say that's why he never bothered with central heat. He said a house should have one warm heart, and you should have to sit near it." I turned my head. He was looking at the fire, not at me, but something in his face had shifted. The quiet competence was still there, but beneath it I could see something else now, a tiredness, a weight that had nothing to do with the dark or the storm or the task of keeping a stove lit. "You said you were here to sell his place," I said. The house 2 doors down. Yeah, he didn't look away from the fire. That's the reason. I'm in Boston. The house has been sitting empty since he died, and the family decided it was time. I drew the short straw. You didn't want to sell it. He was quiet for a moment. The fire popped, and a spark struck the glass door and died. I wanted to be the kind of person who could keep it, he said. Drive up on weekends, fix the dock, chop the wood. But my life doesn't fit that shape anymore. It used to. I thought it did. And then, his hand rested on his knee, and I watched his fingers curl into a loose fist and then release. And then it didn't. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. I'd known since he mentioned Boston, since he mentioned the house sitting empty, since he'd said my life doesn't fit that shape with the careful, practiced tone of someone who'd learned to say the hard thing without flinching. My ex-wife and I, he said, and then he stopped again. He looked at me for the first time since we'd knelt down. The firelight caught his eyes, and they were not unreadable. They were tired and kind and, right then, very open. I'm not good at talking about it. I'm trying. You're doing fine, I said. He smiled. It was a small smile, and it didn't last long, but it reached his eyes. The divorce was final about 6 months ago. We'd been separated longer, and when my uncle died, it was like, I don't know, like the last door closed on a version of my life I'd already lost. Saul was the one who taught me to sit still, to pay attention. He was a quiet man, and he loved this lake, and he loved that house, and I kept thinking that if I could just be here, if I could just be in his space, I'd figure out what I was supposed to do next. But I can't keep it. I can't afford to keep it, and I can't be here enough to make it make sense, and so I'm selling it to someone who can, and I'm supposed to be fine with that. He stopped talking. The wind had picked up again outside, and I could hear it moving through the trees, a long, low sound that made the house feel smaller and closer and more like a boat than a building. I was still holding the flashlight, and my hand was still on my knee, and the warmth of the stove was still on my face, and I could feel the words I wanted to say pressing against the inside of my throat. I know what that's like. I know what it is to lose a version of your life. I know what it is to sit in a quiet house and wait for something to make sense. I didn't say them. I reached for my sketchbook instead. It was on the floor beside the sofa where I'd left it, and I picked it up and brought it back to the hearth. The firelight was brighter now, the flames high and steady behind the glass door, and when I opened the sketchbook to the right page, the light fell across the drawing in a way that made the lines look almost alive. The fisherman, my fisherman, the one I'd been working on for weeks, the one I'd never shown anyone, the one that had started as a photograph of my mother at 35 and become something else entirely, a man in a small boat on a wide lake, his back to the viewer, his line cast into water that was still and deep and full of something I couldn't name. Eli looked at the page. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't say anything. He just looked, and his gaze moved across the drawing the way his hands had moved across the stove, careful, attentive, as if the thing in front of him deserved to be seen slowly. That's the lake, he said, after a moment. That's this lake. Yes. And the boat, that's the kind of boat my uncle had, a little wooden one. He used to take it out in the mornings, before the rest of us were awake. I didn't answer. My throat had gone tight, and I kept my eyes on the drawing, on the curve of the fisherman's shoulder, on the line of the rod, on the water that I'd spent 3 weeks trying to get right. The firelight flickered, and the shadows on the page shifted, and for a moment the fisherman looked like he was moving, like he was about to turn around. My mother gave me the idea for it, I said. Not on purpose. She died 8 years ago. But there's a photograph of her from when she was young. She's standing on a dock, and she's holding a fishing rod, and she's looking out at the water like she's waiting for something. I found the photograph after she was gone, and I kept thinking about it, about her, about what she was waiting for. I stopped. I could feel my pulse in my temples, a light, quick beat, that had nothing to do with the fire or the cold. I had not said this out loud to anyone. I had not said it to my father, or to my friends, or to the therapist I'd stopped seeing after 6 sessions because talking about it made it worse instead of better. I had kept it inside, in the quiet, in the dark, and now I was saying it to a stranger on the floor of my lake house while a blizzard howled outside and the power was out and I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. Eli didn't look away from the drawing. "You drew her waiting," he said. "I drew her not alone," I said. "That's the difference. In the photograph, she's by herself. In the drawing, there's someone with her, someone in the boat, someone who's not going anywhere." The fire popped again. The wind pushed against the windows. Eli's hand was still on his knee, and my hand was still on the sketchbook, and the space between us had not changed, but something in the room had. I could feel it in the way the silence held, in the way he didn't rush to fill it. "Thank you," he said finally, "for showing me." I closed the sketchbook. The cover was heavy, the paper thick, and the sound it made when it shut was final and soft. I set it on the hearth beside the flashlight, and I looked at the fire, and I let the heat press against my face while I waited for the feeling in my chest to settle into something I could name. It didn't settle. It stayed where it was, a small, bright, unsteady thing, and I realized I didn't want it to go away. I wanted to sit with it. I wanted to let it be. "The power might be out all night," I said. "Probably," he said. "I'll keep the stove fed." "Okay." We stayed on the hearth. The fire burned, and the wind blew, and the dark pressed against the windows, and we didn't move. I could feel the warmth of his shoulder still, the 6 inches of air between us that had become something more than air, and I thought about what he'd said about his uncle. Asterisk, a house should have one warm heart, and you should have to sit near it. I was sitting near it, we both were, and outside the snow kept falling, and inside the fire kept burning, and in the dark, in the quiet, in the long, slow hours before dawn, I let myself feel what I was feeling without naming it, without fighting it, without reaching for the door I'd kept locked between myself and the world since my mother died. I just sat there, and so did he, and that was enough. The light came through the windows wrong that morning. Not the clean, angled light of a normal November day, but something muted and diffused, as though the sun itself had to push through a thickness it hadn't anticipated. I lay still under the quilt for a long minute, listening for the wind, and heard nothing. The storm had stopped. The silence after 3 days of constant weather was so complete, it felt like a held breath. I found Eli already at the wood stove. He had his back to me, the iron door open, and he was setting a fresh log onto the coals with the same unhurried precision I'd watched him use the night before. The night the power had cut out, the night I'd told him about my mother's photograph and the fisherman I couldn't stop drawing. The night I'd let myself sit beside him in the dark and feel something I hadn't named. He didn't turn when I came into the room, but he must have heard my footsteps because he said, without looking up, "The coffee's on the counter. Thank you." I poured a cup and held it with both hands, letting the warmth press into my palms. The kitchen felt smaller than it had the day before, or maybe I was just more aware of the space between us, the few feet of floorboards that separated my body from his. I could still see him in the firelight from the night before, the way his face had looked when he'd told me about his divorce, the way he'd said asterisk, I thought I knew how to be a husband asterisk, and then stopped, as though the sentence had surprised him. I wanted to say something about that. I wanted to let him know I'd heard him, that I was still thinking about it. But before I could find the words, a sound reached us from outside, low at first, almost easy to miss. Then it grew, a rhythmic grinding, heavy and mechanical, and the faint beep 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 of something reversing. Eli straightened. He closed the stove door and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside with 2 fingers. The glass was still frosted at the edges. "Sounds like reality is calling," he said. 4 words, that was all. But they landed in my chest with a force that made no sense. a sharp and immediate pressure that I couldn't explain and couldn't push away. I set my coffee down on the counter. My hand was steady enough, but I could feel something pulling tight behind my ribs, a familiar, practiced withdrawal that I recognized from years of watching myself do it. "I suppose it is," I said, and my voice came out flat in a way I hadn't intended. He turned from the window and looked at me, not with accusation. Eli wasn't the kind of man who pushed, but his eyes, those kind, intelligent eyes I'd noticed the first night when I was still too startled to be grateful for them, held a question he didn't ask out loud. I didn't answer it. I moved instead, taking my coffee to the far side of the room, putting the width of the house between us. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the sound felt like an announcement. The plow was closer now. I could hear the scrape of the blade against the road, the heavy churn of the engine. A county truck, probably, working its way down the access road that had been impassable for 3 days. The road that had made this house a sealed world, a place where a stranger could become something else without either of us having to name it. Eli stayed by the window. He didn't follow me, and he didn't ask me to explain. He just stood there with his hands in the pockets of his jeans, looking out at the snow-covered pines and the pale, watery light of the morning. "I'll need to get over to Saul's place soon," he said after a moment. "The realtor's been waiting on me to sign the final paperwork." Saul's place, the house 2 doors down, the house he'd meant to walk into on that first night when he'd used his uncle's key and found me instead. A house that had been sitting empty since Saul died, waiting for Eli to decide what to do with it. I thought about my mother then, not in the way I usually thought about her, as a memory I could pull out and examine. I thought about her as a presence in this house, in these rooms, in the bottle of bourbon still on the shelf, and the photograph tucked inside my sketchbook. I thought about the way I'd been talking to her in my head for 8 years, and how that had become so ordinary I'd stopped noticing it. "She's here, asterisk," I'd told myself 100 times. "She's still here," asterisk, and I'd believed it, or I'd made myself believe it, because the alternative was too empty to hold. But Eli was talking about leaving, about signing papers and closing out his uncle's life and driving back to Boston, and the plow was grinding its way toward us, and the road would be clear by afternoon, and the world I'd been hiding from was about to open its doors again. I pulled out my sketchbook. I don't know why I did it. Habit, maybe, or the need to do something with my hands that wasn't holding a coffee cup and pretending I was fine. The fisherman was there on the page where I'd left him, half finished, his line still uncast, the water around him still too empty. I'd been working on him for weeks. I'd told Eli the truth about him the night before, and that had felt like a kind of offering, a thing I'd given that I couldn't take back. But now, looking at the page, I couldn't see what came next. My hand hovered above the paper, and nothing. The pencil felt wrong in my fingers. The image that had been so clear in my head, the fisherman standing in his boat with the light on the water, had gone flat and distant, like a photograph I'd already looked at too many times. I closed the sketchbook and set it aside. Eli was still at the window. The plow had passed now, moving on toward the next stretch of road, but its sound hung in the air even after it faded, a low vibration that seemed to have settled into the walls of the house. He turned and looked at me, and this time his expression was different. Not hurt, exactly, but something close to it, something careful. "Naomi," he said, and he said my name the way he'd said it the night before, when the power was out and we were sitting on the hearth and he'd told me about his uncle, like it was a word he wanted to get right. "I'm fine," I said, before he could ask. He nodded. He didn't believe me, and I could see that he didn't believe me, but he nodded anyway. That was the kind of man Eli was. He'd let me have my distance if I needed it. He'd let me build my wall, and he wouldn't try to knock it down. And I hated that a little. I hated that he was giving me exactly what I was asking for. The fire crackled in the stove, and the light through the windows stayed muted and gray, and the house felt different than it had the night before. Smaller, quieter, as though something that had been holding us together had already begun to loosen, and neither of us knew how to tighten it again. I thought about the bourbon, my mother's bottle, still on the shelf, still unopened except for the 2 glasses we'd poured the second night. I'd told Eli it was hers. I'd told him she'd bought it the year before she got sick, and he'd held the glass like it mattered, like he understood what it meant to drink something someone else had left behind. I wanted to offer him another pour. I wanted to sit down beside him and let the warmth of the drink and the warmth of the fire and the warmth of his quiet, steady presence pull me back to where I'd been the night before. But I couldn't make myself do it. My body wouldn't move. My mouth wouldn't form the words. The wall was up, and I was behind it, and I didn't know how to come out. The plow was gone now. The road was still. But the silence that filled the house wasn't the comfortable silence we'd shared the night before. It was a waiting silence, a silence that knew it was about to be broken. I looked at my hands, at the sketchbook closed on the table beside me, at the coffee going cold in my cup, and I felt, for the first time in 3 days, the shape of the life I'd been living before Eli walked through my door. The solitude I'd chosen, the grief I'd wrapped around myself like a blanket, the quiet, empty rooms I'd told myself I wanted, it was all still there, waiting for me. I heard the plow before I saw it. The sound came through the walls of the lake house and mechanical, a grinding rumble that had no place in the stillness we'd lived inside for 3 days. I was standing at the kitchen window, my coffee cup half raised, and I watched the orange blade cut a clean line through the white that had buried the access road. The road emerged dark and wet beneath it, a scar reopening. Eli was at the table behind me. I didn't turn around. "That's the road," I said. "I know." His voice was, and even, the same measured tone he'd used all morning while I'd moved through the house like a woman cataloging her own belongings, touching the spines of books, straightening the throw blanket on the armchair, doing the small, useless things people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're still in control of a situation that has already slipped free. I heard him stand. The scrape of the chair against the floorboards was a sound I'd grown used to over 3 days, the particular way the legs caught on the worn spot near the hearth. I'd know that sound now, I thought. I'd know it anywhere, and that was a ridiculous thing to think about a chair, but I thought it anyway. "I should head over to Saul's place," he said. "The paperwork's not going to sign itself." I turned from the window. He was pulling his jacket from the hook by the door, the same navy canvas jacket he'd been wearing the night he walked through my front door thinking it was his uncle's. The night I'd stood in the hallway with my heart in my throat and a stranger in my living room, 3 nights ago. It felt like 3 months. It felt like 3 minutes. "Right," I said, "the paperwork." He looked at me then, and something moved behind his eyes, something I couldn't name but recognized. I'd seen it before, the night the power flickered and we sat side by side on the hearth and neither of us moved. The night he told me about his divorce and I told him about my mother's photograph and the fisherman I couldn't stop drawing. The night everything between us shifted from accidental to something else, something I was still afraid to put a name to. "Naomi." He said my name and stopped. His hand was on the strap of his bag, and he didn't move. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him that the thought of him walking out that door made my chest feel like a room someone had emptied too fast, all the furniture gone and only the echoes left. I wanted to tell him that I'd spent 8 years building a life around the absence of people who might leave, and that I'd gotten very good at it, and that I didn't want to be good at it anymore. But the words wouldn't come. They never came when I needed them. They'd been stuck in my throat since I was 26 years old, standing in a hospital room with my mother's hand in mine, and I'd learned to swallow them down until I couldn't feel them anymore. So I said nothing. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold and my face arranged into something I hoped looked like calm. Eli's hand dropped from the strap. He crossed the room in 3 steps, and then he was in front of me, close enough that I could smell the wood smoke in his shirt and the faint trace of the bourbon we'd shared the night before, the last of my mother's bottle. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, and I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "I'm not ready to go," he said. The sentence landed in the quiet between us and stayed there. "What?" "I've been standing at that door for 10 minutes trying to make myself walk through it." His voice was, and low, and there was something in it I hadn't heard before, a roughness that wasn't anger. "I keep thinking about what happens when I do. I go to Saul's house, I sign the papers, I drive back to Boston, and then what? I spend the next 6 months telling myself that what happened here was just a storm, just a strange 3 days with a stranger who made me feel less alone than I've felt in years. I tell myself it wasn't real, and I'm not sure I can live with that version of the story." I opened my mouth, closed it. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," he said. "I'm not asking for a promise. I'm telling you that I don't want to walk out that door and spend the rest of my life wondering if I made the safest choice or just the most cowardly one." My hand was still holding the coffee cup. I set it down on the counter, and the ceramic clicked against the tile, and I looked at my fingers, at the faint smudge of charcoal still dark under my thumbnail from the sketch I'd abandoned 2 days ago. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "Do what?" "Let someone stay." The words came out before I could stop them, and once they were out, I couldn't take them back. They hung in the air between us, and I felt my face go hot, and I wanted to look away, but I didn't. I made myself keep looking at him. Eli didn't move. He didn't reach for me. He just waited, and the waiting itself was an answer, the kind of answer I'd never gotten from anyone before. "My mother died 8 years ago," I said. "I've told you that. But what I haven't told you is that my parents were divorced before she got sick. My father left when I was 12, and he didn't come back, and my mother spent the rest of her life making sure I knew that she would never do that to me. She was the one person who stayed, and then she died." I stopped. My throat was tight, and the words felt raw, like I was pulling them out of a place I'd kept sealed for a very long time. "I came up here because I thought if I could just be alone, I could finish the work, I could finish the grief, I could get it all out of my system and then go back to the world and be someone who didn't flinch every time a person got too close. But that's not how it works. I don't think it works that way at all. And then you walked through my door, and you were kind, and you stayed, and I realized I've been so afraid of being left that I forgot to let anyone arrive." Eli exhaled. It was a long breath, the kind a person takes when they've been holding something underwater and finally let it surface. "My divorce was final 6 months ago," he said. "I told you that too, but I didn't tell you that I was the one who left, not because I wanted to, because I couldn't figure out how to be the person she needed, and I couldn't stand the look on her face every time I failed. So I left before she could leave me. And I've spent every month since then convincing myself that I'm better off alone, that I'm not built for the kind of closeness that requires you to be seen. But then I met you." He looked at me, and his eyes were steady, the same steady I'd watched him tend the wood stove with, the same steady his Uncle Saul had taught him. "I met you," he said, "and you saw me. You saw me in a way I haven't let anyone see me in years. And I don't want to walk away from that. I don't want to be the man who walked away from that." The fire in the wood stove popped, a soft crack that filled the silence. Neither of us moved. "The bourbon's almost gone," I said. "I know. There's enough for 2 more." He nodded. I crossed to the cabinet and took down the bottle, the last of my mother's bourbon, the amber liquid low in the glass. I poured 2 fingers into each of our cups, the same cups we'd been using for 3 days, and I handed him his, and our fingers brushed, and I didn't pull away. We sat by the wood stove. The fire was low, the embers glowing red and orange, and Eli reached for the poker and nudged a log into place with the same unhurried precision I'd watched him use a dozen times. I thought about his Uncle Saul, about the man who'd taught him to tend a fire and keep a house warm and sit in the quiet with another person without needing to fill it. I thought about how that man was gone and how his legacy was sitting beside me in the form of a structural engineer from Boston who'd walked through the wrong door and decided to stay. "Can I show you something?" I asked. He looked at me over the rim of his cup. "Anything." I reached for my sketchbook. It was on the side table where I'd left it, closed, the charcoal drawing of the fisherman still unfinished on the page where I'd stopped. I opened it and held it out to him, and my hand trembled just a little, just enough that I knew he could see it. He took the sketchbook. He looked at the drawing for a long time, and I watched his face, and I didn't know what I was waiting for until I realized I was waiting for him to say something that would make it smaller, that would make my grief manageable, or my fear reasonable, or my art something other than what it was. He didn't. "This is her," he said, "your mother. It's the photograph, the one I told you about. She's 35, and I'm 4, and she's holding my hand on a dock in a place that looks a lot like this one, and I've been trying to draw it for years. I've been trying to get it right, but I can't finish it. I don't know if I'll ever finish it." "You don't have to finish it." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's already doing what it's supposed to do." He set the sketchbook down on his knee, and his finger traced the edge of the page, not touching the drawing itself, just the margin, the white space around it. "You're not drawing a fisherman. You're drawing the thing you're afraid you'll never have. Someone who stays, someone who holds your hand on a dock and doesn't let go. And you've been drawing it over and over because you're trying to prove to yourself that it's possible. But you don't have to prove it. It's already here." My eyes burned. I blinked, and the fire blurred, and I didn't try to stop it. "Eli," he set the sketchbook aside. He reached for my hand, and his fingers were warm from the cup, and he held my hand the way I'd drawn my mother holding mine, the way I'd been trying to draw for 8 years. "I'm not going to tell you I won't leave," he said. "I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep. But I can tell you this, I want to stay. I want to see what this is. I want to drive back to Boston and call you, and drive back up here and do it again. I want to be the person who shows up, and I think that's the only thing any of us can promise, that we'll try." I looked at our hands. His fingers laced through mine, and my mother's bourbon was in the cup beside me, and the fire was still burning, and the road outside was clear, and he was still here. "I'm scared," I said. "I'm scared all the time. I've been scared since I was 12 years old, and I don't know how to stop." "I know. Does it get easier?" "I don't know." He squeezed my hand. "But I think it gets less lonely if you let someone stay." I leaned forward, or he leaned forward. I don't know who moved first. It didn't matter. His mouth met mine, and the kiss was soft, and it tasted like bourbon and wood smoke and the last 3 days of a life I hadn't planned on living. His hand came up to my jaw, his thumb brushing the line of my cheekbone, and I kissed him back, and I didn't think about what came next. I didn't think about Boston or the road or the outside world or any of the things that had been waiting for us beyond the snow. I thought about his hand on my face. I thought about the way he'd looked at my drawing and seen the thing I couldn't say out loud. I thought about how, for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't alone in a room with my grief. We pulled apart. His forehead rested against mine, and we stayed like that for a moment, and then he laughed, a soft exhale that wasn't really a laugh but was close enough. "I've been wanting to do that for 2 days," he said. "Why didn't you? I was waiting for you to be ready." I pulled back far enough to look at him. And if I was never ready, then I would have waited. I would have waited a long time. I believed him. That was the thing that undid me, the thing that loosened the knot I'd been carrying in my chest since I was 26, and standing in a hospital room and learning that the one person who stayed could still be taken. I believed him. The fire had burned down to embers. The light through the windows was starting to change, the sharp white of afternoon softening into something grayer. something that meant the day was moving on whether we wanted it to or not. Eli stood and added another log to the stove, and I watched him do it, and I thought about all the mornings I'd woken up in this house alone, all the fires I'd built for myself, all the quiet I'd wrapped around my shoulders like a coat I'd forgotten to take off. "I should still go to Saul's," he said. "The paperwork really does need to be signed." "I know, but I'll call you tonight after I'm settled." "You'll call me. I'll call you." He turned from the stove and looked at me, and there was something in his face that hadn't been there 3 days ago, something open, something unguarded. "And then I'll come back if you want me to. I want you to." The words came out fast, faster than I'd ever said anything that mattered, and they were true. They were the truest thing I'd said in years. We exchanged numbers. He wrote mine on a scrap of paper from the kitchen drawer, and I typed his into my phone, and the phone still had no service, but it would, once I drove into town, once the world came back online. I would have his number, he would have mine. The thought felt impossibly simple and impossibly large. He slung his bag over his shoulder. He walked to the door, and this time he didn't pause. He opened it, and the cold air rushed in, and I could see the road beyond the porch, the dark, wet line of it cutting through the snow, and I could see his truck parked where he'd left it 3 days ago, the windshield still dusted with frost. He turned back. "Naomi, yeah. Thank you for letting me in, both times." I laughed. It was a small sound, but it was real, and it surprised me. "You're welcome, both times." He nodded. He stepped out onto the porch, and the door closed behind him, and I stood in the living room of the lake house and listened to his boots crunch across the snow. I listened to the truck door open and close. I listened to the engine turn over, and then I listened to the sound of him driving away down the road that had been buried for 3 days and was now clear, and I didn't feel the old familiar weight settle into my chest. I didn't feel the door close on something I'd never get back. I felt the fire still warm behind me. I felt the bourbon still on my tongue. I felt my phone in my pocket, heavy with a number I hadn't had this morning, and I walked to the table, and I opened my sketchbook, and I looked at the fisherman, at my mother's hand holding mine, at the drawing I'd been trying to finish for 8 years. I picked up my charcoal. I didn't finish it, but I added something. A second figure on the dock, a little farther down, a man with a steady hand and kind eyes and a navy canvas jacket, someone who'd walked through the wrong door, someone who'd decided to stay. The truck disappeared around the bend in the road. I stood at the window until I couldn't hear the engine anymore, and then I stood there a little longer, because for the first time in 8 years, the leaving didn't take anything with it. The fire was still burning. The bourbon was still warm in the cup. The phone in my pocket had a number in it that hadn't been there at breakfast. That was the first truth I learned that morning, that you can love someone enough to let them leave on a Sunday and not have it feel like the old kind of leaving. The second I learned a few hours later, when I sat back down at the hearth with the sketchbook open. The fisherman was still half finished, but the boat wasn't empty anymore. The thing I'd been trying to draw for 8 years, someone who stays, someone who holds your hand on a dock and doesn't let go, had already arrived, and it hadn't taken anything from me to let him in. I think about it sometimes, whether being so used to being alone can make letting someone arrive feel harder than being left. If you're new here, this is Isabelle Cross Romance Stories, first-person love stories about the moments when the door we kept locked finally opens. Subscribe if you'd like the next one to find its way to you on a quiet evening. And if Naomi's voice stayed with you, leave a comment with the word "stay" so I know you were here. Until next time, love, Isabelle.